Hello and welcome to this video. Someone in the comments recently said, and I don't know if they were sort of taking the mickey out of me a little bit, but they said I should do the 10 greatest noses in rock and roll ranked. It's like throwing a gauntlet down to me, that is. So I thought, well, yes, I'll do it then. If you're going to joke about it, I'll do it for real. So here it is, the 10 greatest noses in rock and roll. In 20th century popular music, to be more exact. But rock and roll sounds cooler. Now, I have been working recently, researching a video into the minimalist composers, you know, coming out of people like Lamonte Young and Terry Riley, and then people like Steve Reich coming in, and then Philip Glass, and sort of modern classical music coming and impinging on rock and roll, and the influence on people like King Crimson, the influence on people like Mike Oldfield. And that would be quite a serious video, but I know you don't really want that, do you? I mean, it's all a bit heavy going. I think you'd much rather have something like this where we can just go through a list of 10 noses and rank them. Now, obviously, it would be so shallow to be ranking these noses in terms of just size alone. So I've taken into a whole bunch of accounts. That's not the right word. That's rubbish, isn't it? I've taken into account a whole bunch of criteria with this, but obviously size being important, but not only being the factor. We've also looked at shape, design, but probably cultural significance, I think, is very, very important, and how much this nose has impinged on sort of, you know, Western culture. The influence it's had in the development of rock and roll, especially in the development of what we consider a rock star to be. Now, you'd be surprised to learn that actually the schnozola, as you could call it, has been an aspect of popular music right from day one. In 1893 was born a great entertainer and musician and comedian, Jimmy Durante. Now, Jimmy Durante emerged in New York in the late teens, early 1920s of the 20th century. He worked with the original Dixieland Jazz Band, which was the first jazz group ever recorded. And then from there, he formed his own band, taking jazz influences, but doing them in a sort of comedic way. And I think this is a very important channel in terms of taking jazz and not just it being developed towards sort of highfalutin ideas, but also it becoming the foundation of rock and roll, which comes out of a sort of novelty form. Now, I'm being very serious here about Jimmy Durante. Now, I think a lot of people wouldn't know who he is nowadays, old Jimmy. But if you're of my era, you probably know him because the great Eric Morecambe of Morecambe and Wise used to make us laugh in the 70s by taking a plastic cup and putting it over his nose and then going, "Playing my piano is off for day," and doing an impersonation of Jimmy Durante. And so here we have an example of how the schnozola, right? The schnozola has impacted on 20th century culture, affecting many people of my age to, you know, find funny somebody putting a plastic cup on their nose. I wish I had one here to demonstrate it, but I haven't. I do have this little bag though here, which is not quite the same, but I could still, this is a little bag that you put, like, you know, those little microphones you clip on. I never use them. I bought some and I thought that's too complex for me to use anyway. So that is representing the schnozola of Jimmy Durante. Right, so prepare to laugh at this because it will make you laugh. This is proper comedy, this is. Oh. So that's Jimmy Durante done. Little bit of history for you. You can't moan. You might have learned something. But he's not on the list. But he has been honoured, and I dedicate this list to the great but now forgotten Jimmy Durante, one of the important figures in 20th century music. And I'm not joking. It sounds like I'm being a bit sarky, but I'm not. He really was. So shall we start at number 10? Right, so the first thing is, and I've represented this at number 10, is something else I must mention as well, because it's going to become quite apparent that, and if I don't say this, you'll be putting it in the comments. We'll be 5 minutes in, haven't even started. This can't end up being a long video, can it? The 10 biggest noses in rock. That's what I've got written down here. I also have a prominent schnoz, don't I? I have a significant hooter. You know, I do, don't I? And I've always been quite proud of it. And I think that in much the same way as Samson derived his strength from his hair, I derived my strength from my nose. You know, so you can say what you want about it. I don't care. I'm very proud of it. And you know what they say about men with big noses? Big handkerchiefs. Right. All the old jokes are the best. Right. Shall we just get straight into this now? Have I said everything I wanted to say? Oh, yes. There's one more fact that I found out this morning, just as I did a tiny bit of research for this one, is that the word schnoz, which Jimmy Durante then Italianized into schnozola, right, is actually a Yiddish word that does mean big nose. I thought it was just an appropriation of nose, schnoz, but apparently it is a proper Yiddish word which means big nose. Anyway, the facts are out. You've learned something. Now let's have some fun. So at number 10, I want to talk about something that's quite apparent in rock and roll, and that's where someone emerges and they've got a big nose, and then once they make some money out of the music business, they then get their nose adapted into a more normal nose, which I think is absolutely terrible and wrong, and I think these people should be pointed out. One such person would be Cilla Black, and I was going to put her on the list. I was going to put poor old Cilla on the list with her big nose and then show what happened to her nose. Obviously, Michael Jackson didn't necessarily have a big nose, but he did adapt his nose for popular music. The guy I'm going to go for at number 10 is actually Tom Jones, because I love Tom Jones. I think he's a great artist, great singer. And when he emerged in the 1960s, he seemed to have a sexual power and magnetism that few rock and roll pop stars could compete against. I mean, none of the Stones or the Beatles, they were all like wheezy little blokes, weren't they, really? But Tom Jones seemed like a real man, and of course his real manliness, you know, transferred to his following amongst the ladies, you know, and he got a certain reputation. Old Tom did. Now, one of the things that's very interesting to see his nose in the early days, which looked like this, and then a few years later it ended up looking like this. And also what's interesting with Tom is how brown he got. As time went on, he seemed to get browner and browner, and his hair got more curlier and curlier. Now, this is probably the worst example of cultural appropriation in the history of rock and roll, which I thought I'd point out because no one said it. But I think Tom, whatever he was up to in this phase of getting browner and browner and his hair getting curlier and curlier, I think he was doing it out of love of all the different cultures. That's all I'm going to say. But I'm not going to have a go in for that, and I don't expect you to, but I think it should be pointed out that he did change the shape of his nose. And I don't know whether it's an improvement. I think I prefer the larger nose Tom Jones of the early days, but I'm a purist when it comes to these things. Of course, it has to be argued that did he ever have a hit record really that was any good, that was like, you know, actual hit after he got a smaller nose? And so, you know, the nose being, you know, hemmed in might have also hemmed in his ability to have hit records, you know, driving him towards Las Vegas in the end. You know, I think by the 1980s he was in Las Vegas, where obviously he went for this sort of ultra brown look. More recently here in the UK, he's become a judge on The Voice, where he has sat there like a sort of little, you know, it's almost like pop music royalty, and he's been wonderful, you know. 85 years old Tom, you know, a hero of mine and one of the great singers to come out of Wales, him and Shirley Bassey, who hasn't got a big nose. She's got a normal sized nose. Right, shall we move on to number 9 now? At number 9, I have got Lady Gaga. Now, Lady Gaga is a pop star. She's been around for quite a while. I actually think she's quite a good singer. I've heard her sing some really good stuff, and I heard her do some stuff with Tony Bennett, the great Tony Bennett, who also had a bit of a schnoz on him as well, but didn't make the list probably because he's more on the jazz side than he is on the rock side. But by the by, Lady Gaga has then branched out to doing acting and all that type of thing. And I think she's very good. I think she's a very talented lady. Now, of course, in this modern world where in modern popular music, looks count a lot. But Lady Gaga hasn't bothered about that. She hasn't bothered to change the nose at all. She's kept with it. And I think that's a really positive thing. One of the things about Lady Gaga that I think is interesting is that I'm a huge fan of the early 80s pop band Missing Persons, which was put together by Terry Bozzio and his wife Dale Bozzio. And Dale Bozzio came in with a very unique image, which you can probably see now, and a very unique approach to popular music, which I think was far more influential than people make out. And I want to just hear, seriously, champion Missing Persons, which seem to combine, excellent pop music writing, an innovative approach to music video, and sort of that early 80s electronic sound, combined with an absolute virtuosity, and Dale Bozzio's incredible self-image, which she is so iconic. And it's a shame that Lady Gaga's taken that away from her. But the one thing that Dale Bozzio didn't have was a large hooter. And I think it just shows how important that is. And I think I can use this as an example. Dale Bozzio, brilliant image, it's all there, average hooter. Lady Gaga takes that image, adds the big hooter, and before you know it, worldwide fame. Let's move on. Here in the UK, we took sort of rock and roll off the Americans and we made it better by combining it with all sorts of great things, and bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Kinks, all those bands. We then sort of showed the Americans how to do rock and roll, Now, the thing that's interesting about this is the lack of large noses in American rock and roll when we compare it to British rock and roll in the 1960s. And as this list goes on, you will see that it just goes on and on and on. And the Americans have only, when they've been able to come up with a sizable, nose, the person hasn't had the rock and roll credentials. This is quite obvious when you look at this list. Now, one of the reasons why we were so great at making rock and roll in the 1960s was because of the skiffle craze. The skiffle craze emerged in the 1950s, and it was sort of the 1950s British version of punk rock. Anybody could become a skiffle musician. You just need an acoustic guitar, maybe a washboard to scratch for a bit of rhythm. You could make an acoustic bass out of a tea chest and a broom handle. No one's ever heard these instruments, but this apparently you could do all this. And so everybody started playing in skiffle bands, including the Beatles, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, the guys from The Who. They were all in skiffle bands. Now, who was the skiffle king? Well, we know who it is. It was the great Lonnie Donegan. And Lonnie Donegan came out of the sort of trad jazz boom that happened in the 1940s. And as an aside, as they were looking into all this early jazz stuff, the sort of thing that Jimmy Durante had been involved in, it was thought it might be an idea to look into sort of the American folk forms, the Lead Belly and some of the Delta blues musicians and all other American folk forms. And Lonnie Donegan started to do this live, and it became very successful. And Lonnie Donegan then had a huge hit record with a number of incredible tunes, which still rock to this day. And I think these tunes are so important in the development of rock and roll. But of course, Lonnie Donegan had a sizable nose. He had un grand hauteur, as the French would say. I don't know why I said that then, because hauteur that's not French for nose. It's nez. That's French for nose, isn't it? Une grande nez. Is that right? I don't really speak French. But I might, well, I just did then, didn't I? In describing the great Lonnie Donegan. So when Lonnie Donegan emerged, and I think one of the things is because he sort of channeled that sort of frenetic folk sort of, he brought in that sort of George Formby-esque sound to a sound that basically he'd taken from Leadbelly, who had a very sonorous, deep voice, and of course the British people couldn't compare with that. So a little bit of George Formby, a little bit of Leadbelly, great big nose, and we have all of rock and roll, basically. Maybe Lonnie Donegan should be higher on the list, but we have some sizable noses coming up. Right, so at number 7, I thought there's a big following for progressive rock here. And I thought, I wonder if big noses are featured in the history of progressive rock. And there's 2 very important musicians, I think, in the field of prog. But actually, amongst the British musicians, there's not that many big noses, and I searched far and wide. And then suddenly I realised that there was one literally under my nose. Well, not under my nose, but probably under their nose, because they're the one with the big nose, although I also have a big nose, But what it was, I looked at this guy so many times and it had just passed me over. So this is an example of what I would call a stealth nose, where someone is able to sneak in a big nose into sort of modern culture. And then nobody makes any jokes about it. Many of the people on here are famous for their big noses. And, you would expect if someone was doing an impersonation of them that they would do the big nose. But this person, who is so important in the history of progressive rock, not only has not had his big nose featured culturally, but also he himself seems to have been absolved from this sort of focus. His sort of visual, how can I explain this? Well, shall I just say who it is, and then I'll try and explain what I mean. This is Mike Rutherford from Genesis. Now, Genesis has become the de rigueur prog band, really. Now, I think most bands who are playing progressive rock now are either drawing from Pink Floyd or Mike Rutherford from Genesis. Now, of course, old Roger Waters is not on my list, but he also has a sizable nose, doesn't he? And again, does anyone mention his nose? No, they don't. He's at number 11 on my list. If you wonder why he's not on my list, it's not like I just realised he's another one as I got to this point. Mike Rutherford is not Peter Gabriel. He's not Phil Collins. He's not even grumpy and opinionated Tony Banks, is he? He just seems like a nice guy. Very, very posh, of course, but a nice guy. And so I think he has been quite happy to sit in the background in prog culture. And it's probably because he didn't want to become famous and literally eclipse the other members of the band with his, considerably large nose. Mike Rutherford. Big nose Mike Rutherford. Right, let's move on. When I was a kid, all right, and this guy's not really rock and roll, but he is American, and I thought I need to get more Americans on because we are really dominating it, as we always do. Well, as I was a kid, if I'd have thought of a big nose, I would have thought of Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow has become the king of kitsch, sort of middle of the road stuff, but actually I find that Barry is a very accomplished musician and composer and songwriter, and although his songs are cheesy, there's something quite joyous about them, and I do enjoy Barry Manilow's stuff. I can remember one night staying up as a kid and Barry Manilow came on, and when he was playing, he had this all-star band full of jazz rock musicians. I can remember Stanley Clarke was on bass, and that changed my opinion. I thought Barry likes the jazz rock. And I warmed to him a lot more then, knowing that he's probably like me, a big jazz rock fan, but not only a big jazz rock fan, but a jazz rock fan with a big nose. Now, his nose is really big, and I've always felt with Barry, it makes him look like some sort of docile woodland creature. It doesn't have the aggressive effects, of power and fortitude that, say, a nose like mine does, or many of the people on this list, where that authority of the big nose, the authority of the big nose comes out, and when people see it, they go, I've got to listen to this guy. Barry Manilow doesn't do that, and I think it's because his face is quite small. Now, as a kid, you might think, why have you even got an interest in Barry Manilow, Andy? Well, the reason is because as a kid, when I used to get up in the morning, I used to listen to the Terry Wogan Show, which was a show that was on the radio as I was getting ready for school. And he would often play Barry Manilow, and I would enjoy this as a young boy listening to it. But he didn't call him Barry Manilow. He called him Mangy Bendy Toy, I think. Have I got anything else I can say about Barry Manilow at this point? Not really, except that that, and this is a bit bizarre, is that the great Kenny Everett did a spoof. He did a parody of Barry Manilow, which obviously focused entirely around the size of his nose, and that looked like this. Now that, of course, is one of the most funniest scenes on television in the history of mankind, but it's eclipsed, and I've used that word twice in this video, and I do apologise, but I don't know why I am, but I have. But it's eclipsed by his video where he parodies Rod Stewart, and that one goes like this. Now, as you can see, what's interesting is that with Barry Manilow, he's parodied his nose. With Rod Stewart, he's parodied the buttocks, or rear, the old, bottom. Which is interesting, because I don't think that Rod Stewart has actually really got a sizable bottom compared to other rock stars, and that may be the next video. Although I think that will get overwhelmed by a lot of music that's come out of the black music. It's going to be hip hop, really. It's going to win that one over and over again, isn't it, really? I can't think of any big bottoms in mainstream rock. I mean, you got Leslie West from Mountain. Yeah, I mean, but he was big all over, wasn't he? Who else? Meatloaf. I imagine he had quite a big bum. Anyway, stop working on that video and stay on this one. Who are we talking about? Oh, yeah. That video. Now, Rod Stewart, also being a British rock star, has a sizable nose. He's actually number 12 on the list. You can see how many there are. And anybody who thinks this is stupid, I want you to go away thinking, Andy's right. All those 1960s British rock musicians have got big noses. It's true. No one's pointed it out before. Here I am, doing this sort of thing, and we're coming up to 25 minutes. I'm only not even halfway through this. This is going to be a long video. I thought it would be about 20 minutes, but no. Once I get something in, once I get the bit between my teeth, I can drag out an hour of anything, even the 10 biggest noses. This is why I am one of the great music YouTubers. You ain't going to get Rick Beato or any of those guys doing an hour on noses, are you? It's only I can do that. Oh, stop boasting, Andy, and get on with it. Right, so at number 5, and this goes to show how the Americans can't do prog. I've said this over and over again. The only true prog stars they've got would be Frank Zappa and Todd Rundgren. And they purvey their own style of prog. It's very different to British prog, but the rest of them just copy the British bands. There's no major noses anyway. I can't think of any. I can't think of anybody in Kansas or Styx with a sizable hooter. But of course, the Canadians, being sort of British, a little bit more Britishy than the people from the United States of America. I don't know what it is, but they just seem to be like that. A little bit more weirder and stranger. They just seem to have that about them. Have produced one of the greatest progressive rock bands in the history of progressive rock, which is, of course, Rush. And Rush has an incredible nose on their lead singer, bass player, keyboardist, Taurus pedal presser, Geddy Lee. Now, Geddy Lee, of course, and he's made a big deal of this, is of Jewish descent, and his ancestors, his sort of grandparents, I think, or maybe even his mom, I can't remember, were actually concentration camp survivors, and he's made a major deal about this. Now, of course, you can see on this video, I have swayed away, even though I reference the idea that the big nose comes from Yiddish. You know, I have shied away of putting the large nose along with the stereotype of a Jewish person having a big nose, and all the sort of stereotypes that go with that, which I think are they're not very nice at all. And so I'm not going to go there, but it has to be said that, I mean, it's like, I'm sure my ancestors have got the same sort of lineage, you know, and many a time people have said, are you Jewish, Andy? And I've said, no, I'm not Jewish, but I might have a bit of Jewishness there in my nose. So I want you to realise that in me pointing this out, I wanted to represent the Jewish people because they have, you know, invented the word schnoz, for example. So Geddy Lee carries on in that tradition, doesn't he? And of course, that great big nose of his enabled him to reach notes that no normal human could ever reach, you know. An absolutely incredible hooter he has got. And again, Rush, who are not your sort of average rock band singing songs about, you know, right-wing politics and trees having arguments with each other, all that stuff that Rush do, was then made even more difficult by the fact that they were trying to break through into the mainstream rock and roll industry with Geddy Lee, who I always thought he's not the best looking bloke in the world, isn't he? I mean, old Alex Lifeson and Neil Peart, they were good looking blokes. Maybe they carried it for Geddy a little bit, you know, but he was so talented, he could do everything, old Geddy. But I think what happened is that with the lack of large hooters in the new world, right, in terms of rock and roll, he represented something which they just hadn't got. And I think that's why they became one of the great rock bands of all time. I hope you're following all this, because it really is a strong argument that of how important noses are in music history. Right, who have I got? Number 4. I had to put her on. I absolutely love her. She's one of the greatest singers of the 20th century. And I think, and I had an argument with my daughters about this, because they came in the other day and they said, who do you think's a beautiful woman? And I said, Barbra Streisand. And they Googled her because I'd never heard of her. And then when they saw her, they went, she's got a big nose. And I said, yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Barbra Streisand's an immensely talented lady, an incredible singer. She can deliver the song. She's a great actress. I mean, what can we say? I've got some Barbra Streisand albums at home. I've got the album, I think it came out in the mid-70s, called The Way We Were. I love that album. And her vocals are incredible. I love Barbra Streisand, right? I'm telling you, I'm not joking, this is serious. I really do love her. I think she's incredible. And I love listening to her sing. And I'm sure many people here will be backing me up in, you know, she is the real deal. She is without a doubt the real deal. Oh, Barbra is incredible. And she's got a really big nose, especially for a lady. I mean, we've had 2 ladies on here. We've had Lady Gaga, who obviously is a lady because she's put that at the front. Unless she was called that, which no mom's going to say, well, sure, what should we call this little girl? How about calling her Lady Gaga? Mr. and Mrs. Gaga, have you got a name for your baby? Yeah, we were thinking of calling her Lady. Oh, that's good. I like that. Not Radio. No, you didn't think of that one straight off, Radio Gaga. But I think there's a Queen song called that. Yeah, there is. Yeah, you can't be having that, can you? And anyway, so she's a lady, but so is, Barbra Streisand's a lady. If she was in the UK, she would be a lady. They would, the royal family, the Queen would have given her a royal title, without a doubt. She'd be a dame. Now, a dame is an American version of the word lady, but it's. I always feel it's a bit derogatory. You know, it's a little bit New York. Hey, there's a couple of dames there. Anyway, God, you're padding this one out, Andy. And the old nose on Barbra Streisand, that nose has not affected her beauty. Now, in this modern age, where what passes as beautiful women is just photoshopped banality. And there's no character there, is there? They all look the same. Every woman looks the same. Oh, look at that, look at that. And they photograph him in a certain way, so they can't see any actual facial features. It's just eyes and nose. And now they're all exaggerating that with great big lips and all great false eyelashes. It's all, I don't like it at all. Barbra Streisand's a proper beautiful lady as far as I'm concerned, because she has her own look. She's recognisable, you know. I mean, Barbra Streisand, you know, when she enters a room, you know she's going to enter the room before she enters, doesn't she? And it's not because of her charisma, it's because of the actual nose. Right, we're coming back down to the top three here. And this is where we really have these sort of kings of the large, you know, central face appendage. And at number three, I've got, of course, Ringo Starr. Oh, I mean, the thing with the Beatles is they're all very talented, aren't they? But they weren't the best looking lot. I mean, everyone, the girls like Paul McCartney, you know, but he's not Roger Moore, is he, old Paul McCartney? He's not Sean Connery, is he? Is he? I mean, look at him. John Lennon, not a reasonably sized hooter. George Harrison in the corner, beardy. Ringo Starr, you know, he was sat at the back, and I've done videos on, you know, championing how great Ringo was, but he never got perceived as being the talent like the other three. But he sat at the back smiling away, and put it quite frank, he's an ugly man, isn't he? He's an ugly man with a big nose. And he would grin away in the background with that big nose sticking out like that. And obviously, when he went to America, they'd never seen a nose like that. They never seen a nose like that, you know. Us British people, noses and teeth, that's something that we've got. That's what, you know, anyway. So, old Ringo turns up on the Ed Sullivan Show, blows everybody away. And everyone thinks it's the songs. Everyone thinks it was the unique sound the Beatles had. No, it wasn't. What it was is that all the girls were screaming at him. And a whole bunch of men out there looked at how ugly Ringo was, went, oh my God, if he's that ugly and he's got those girls, there's hope for us all. And this really, I think, is one of the most important innovations of rock music in the 20th century, is that it enabled ugly blokes to get fit women, right? And that motivated so many people I know that don't really have any talent and shouldn't be going anywhere near music, but have ventured into it not because they have a love of music, but because they thought, if I join a band and stomp around with my big nose, I will be able to get the girls in a way that I can't if I don't. And I think this is so important, so important. I don't know if you've noticed, is that as I'm doing this, our Lord and Saviour up in heaven is controlling the weather, and so a beam of light is actually lighting up my nose now as we get to the last three. It's quite incredible, isn't it? You know, that's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Now I'm having to keep my head still as my nose seems to be glowing. It's glowing at you like Ringo's. So yeah, and then he ended up with Barbra back, didn't he? I mean, look at the bloke, look at him, and look at her. This is remarkable, and it's never gone away. It's never gone away. They were all ugly, weedy, big nosed blokes. Look at the Stones, big noses everywhere. You know, Ron Wood. You know, and you know if you see their wives, this is the big motivator to pick up a guitar and play, and nobody wants to mention it. I would say the greatest of all the noses in the 1960s rock and roll scene, and we've gone through a few. We've mentioned Rod Stewart, we've mentioned the guys of the Stones, we've mentioned Roger Waters. You know, there'll be a whole bunch of big noses. Without a doubt, the cream of the crop, and at number 2 in the charts here is the great Pete Townshend. His nose is not only large, but it actually is strangely shaped, isn't it? And the shape of it, which is so prominent in the front of his face, seems to pull his face in, like as though it's got its own gravitational force, you know, in the middle of his face, and it's pulling his face in. A little like the effect you would get if you looked into a concave lens. Now, I don't know if I've got the plug-in on on my video editing, but if I have, I'm going to do it now. If I haven't, and I'll have to try and do it another way. But if I can just position myself in the middle and then just... So hopefully you are seeing that, and I'm hoping that you are going, oh my God, Andy now looks exactly like Pete Townshend. Now this effect can be created quite simply by just looking in the back of a mirror. Now, as a kid, when I had very little interest in rock music, but I knew of the bands. Me and my brother would sit down to have our Weetabix in the morning, and while we were waiting for our mom to heat the milk up on the stove, because that was the how you made hot milk, to pour onto the Weetabix, we would sit there with our spoons ready, holding them like this. And then one of us, me or my brother, every morning would say, hey, look, Pete Townshend, and we'd look at ourselves in the mirror, and then my brother would laugh his head off, even though he couldn't see my reflection, then he would look at himself, and then we would look at ourselves, and this is the entertainment in the 70s, we didn't have the internet, and we would laugh, and we'd go, it's Pete Townshend, it's Pete Townshend, and to me, it's like that transmuted me into being Pete Townshend, which I think really was probably the thing that enabled The Who to last so long, because obviously by 1975 they never made a decent record ever again, did they? Right, who've I got a number one? Well, you know, the bloke who put the comment up, he goes, why don't you do your top 10 rock and roll noses, and you could have Frank Zappa at number one. Any excuse to have Frank Zappa at number one, but he has got the greatest nose in rock and roll. If you draw a nose, then put that iconic moustache underneath it, you don't need to draw anything else. You know who we're talking about. Frank Zappa had a big nose. Now, in the 80s, he started to make video. And his videos came out with this very incredible logo that I liked very much, of a sort of a window or a door with his nose poking through with "It's a honker." And I haven't used the word honker at all in this. Now, a honker is one of those horns that you go, that's a honk. That would be like a horn like you'd have on an old car, you know, in the 1930s. Get out the way, you know. And that honk of that horn has been associated with a big nose, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So if I just do this, right, are you ready for this now? Now, as you can see, if you know what you're doing, because I haven't added any sound effects to that, that is really the sound that my nose makes. If you do that, and I'm sure if you brought all these incredible musicians together in one room, and with Frank Zappa in charge, he would be able to create some sort of composition out of all the rock and roll noses lined up, and he would go about, or maybe get you to squeeze your own nose, but have him conducting in the way he would, you know, turning it, you know, twizzling his little what they call dreadlocks to mean it's reggae or whatever he used to do, or what he would like, what would he do? Like 4 flats. He would do that, and that would represent a key. Frank Zappa, one of the great noses, well, as I've said, the greatest nose in rock and roll. So we have now got to the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I have decided the month of August. Last month we were looking at proper YouTubing. That's me in front of my records, pulling records out and going through top 10s. And yeah, some people liked it, but the few ones that I did that were a bit silly and like this did much better. So I'm having a silly August. I don't think this one will do that well, to be honest. Who knows? You get it? The Who knows? Who knows? Oh, God, this is proper entertainment, isn't it, really? So if you like this video, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. I have a Patreon, I have a membership here, and I have a PayPal tip jar. And those are always to recompense me in some way or support me in creating very informative and important videos like I have done today. You know, the sort of ones where I can't be asked to go to my studio to do, you know, that sort of thing, you know. See you all. Bye-bye.